What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, live today on May the 1st, to start some new conversations around the NFL. April's behind us, the NFL draft is behind us, but that doesn't prevent us from still talking around some things being discovered around the NFL draft, new storylines to get into today, starting with T. Higgins and his contract development and how that's all being worked on. So far, nothing really has been made of that contract, but there have been some recent developments that I will get into. Then later on in the show, more on the draft. The Buffalo Bills selected Keon Coleman in the second round, and there were some few interesting nuggets taken away from his press conference, what he had to say in regards to his top 30 visit and what Josh Allen actually texted him the day right before he got drafted to start the second round. Josh Allen sent him a text, and I'll get into what he said specifically and what this could mean for the Buffalo Bills. And then to round it off, later on in the show, we'll touch on the Netflix special, their first ever live roast on none other than Tom Brady, debuting on May 5th. I'll get into more recent developments on that, who has been announced to be live at the event to take part in roasting the greatest quarterback of all time. So stick around and find out what entails in all those stories. And remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And before I start on the first segment, as always, if you have any questions or comments you want to make, please use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, GSMCPodcast.net. By using this link, your question will pop up in my chat box, and I can read the question on air and interact with you guys and just maybe have a different perspective on a segment topic that we're getting into. It's a lot more engaging, and it's a massive help for this show as well as all the other shows across the network. So again, if you would, please use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net, with any of your comments or questions. In saying that, we'll touch on T. Higgins now, the wide receiver, one of the star wide receivers for the Cincinnati Bengals. It was about 2 weeks ago that T. Higgins admitted ultimately that it was looking likely for him to play another year with the Cincinnati Bengals. He was asked about it at one of his youth camps, and he basically said that it's looking more and more likely he's open to returning to the Bengals. Nothing has been done so far around his contract, which has been probably one of the biggest stories, if not the biggest story for the Cincinnati Bengals this offseason, along with Jamar Chase and his contract situation coming down the road. Trey Hendrickson, now, like I talked about yesterday, requesting a trade and how he fits into the salary cap and trying to figure out all these contracts, including T. Higgins. But regardless of that, he is definitely a priority for the Bengals. He has done a lot of great things for them since they drafted him in the second round a few years ago. And since then, he has put up great numbers. He's had 1,000-yard seasons in 2021 and 2022. He's formed a great relationship and a very formidable duo with Jamar Chase. But I don't think most people will argue that Jamar Chase is surely the wide receiver one. That really isn't the problem here. The biggest issue with T. Higgins right now, he has no problem with staying in Cincinnati. It's not like he has a problem within the team. It's not working with him and Jamar. He's not getting enough receptions. It's not anything like that. It's just like most receivers who find themselves in this situation around fifth-year options, franchise tags. The biggest issue is just getting or feeling valued, I should say, by the team that they're on and getting the money that they feel that they deserve. And the biggest issue for T. Higgins is that Cincinnati has not offered him another year since about over a year ago was the last contract offer that they proposed to T. Higgins. Kelsey Conway of the Cincinnati Enquirer reported that the Bengals' offer to T. Higgins never actually approached that $20 million per year range, and it was nowhere near the desired amount of money that T. Higgins and his group of representatives would be satisfied with to move on to talk about the guaranteed money. It never got to that point. And thus you saw him request a trade already to try and apply some more pressure to the Cincinnati Bengals for a new deal. But he was ultimately franchise tagged, and because of that, he almost lost all of the leverage he could have had by requesting a trade. It's not like they have to deal him. He's on that franchise tag, so like most other players, he is expected to play with them, at least for this coming year. And then I'm sure they're going to revisit this during the season or into next offseason. I highly doubt they want to let him test free agency, but like I mentioned with Jamar Chase and already signing Joe Burrow to a massive extension, how does this all fit into the books, as well as trying to build a competitive team and have great players all over the roster, not just accumulated to a few positions on the offensive side of the ball. So that's a big thing. And on that franchise tag, also one more thing. There were a lot of players franchise tagged before the deadline, of course, and since then, most of them have been signed to extensions. T. Higgins is one of only 2 players that were franchise tagged, that remain franchise tagged, that didn't sign extensions. L'Jarius Sneed was tagged, but he was traded to the Titans, and he signed that massive extension. Josh Allen signed also a massive extension to stay with Jacksonville. Brian Burns also tagged, but he was traded as well. A lot of them have been able to figure out long-term extensions already. The only other one that hasn't is Antoine Winfield from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I've reported a while ago that he was looking likely to figure this all out soon, but nothing has really moved on from that point. So still, Winfield and T. Higgins remain on that franchise tag. But unlike Winfield, nothing has moved in really almost a year for T. Higgins and trying to figure out the kind of money that he feels he deserves. And more on what Kelsey Conway reported from the Cincinnati Enquirer. She touched on that the main focus for T. Higgins is looking to get a deal somewhat similar to the deals you saw from Michael Pittman, Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, all around that 24, or I should say probably 23 to $27 million range, I would assume, would get the deal over the line for T. Higgins and get this process moving a little bit more. Higgins will make around $22 million on that franchise tag, so they're already paying that amount, but to not offer him $20 million up to this point, it's pretty ridiculous and borderline disrespectful if you want to go that far. I don't think I'm willing to push it that far, but this is one of your most premier offensive skill-based positions that makes a difference when he's on the field, and when he's on it, he's engaged in everything. That connection he has with Joe Burrow, not to mention all the attention that Jamar Chase attracts to his side. T. Higgins is a very valuable weapon for them. They also lost Joe Mixon already, and they're bringing in other guys like Mike Gesicki. They drafted Jermaine Burton from Alabama, but in terms of just reliable NFL experience, consistent weapons, Jamar and T. Higgins are the ones for Joe Burrow. With no Joe Mixon now, you bring in Zach Moss, and you don't know how that's really going to work out. I would have to imagine that you want to do everything you can to try and keep Higgins on this team. Now, of course, you have to take into account the big question. You signed Joe Burrow to a massive deal already. That's logical. He's the quarterback. He's played well in the playoffs, getting you to a Super Bowl. But then you look at Jamar Chase, and I mentioned before, he is the undoubted number 1 receiver on this team. And the way that he's performed, generational type of player for the Cincinnati Bengals, you would have to imagine that the way that the market's going for the wide receivers, he's going to want up to at least $30 million, if not more. How does that all take into account trying to fit in a $30+ million receiver, another $25 million receiver, and plus your quarterback, Joe Burrow, who is the highest paid quarterback on an annual salary basis? You can't have all of them be the highest paid and still have a lot of money to work with for the rest of your team. That's sort of the trail that the Dallas Cowboys are falling into, just for a comparison. That's something the Bengals have to figure out right now. I mentioned the franchise tag, buying them that extra bit of time. but he will be eligible to be a free agent in 2025. And the craziest thing that I didn't know is that 18 wide receivers are making more than $20 million already per year. So to imagine T. Higgins wanting at least 20, that has to be the absolute bottom that you have to talk to. But for now, they haven't really offered it to him that much. He seems a little bit frustrated by it, but acknowledging that he doesn't hold the leverage up to this point. To have 18 wide receivers paid more than T. Higgins, just based on talent, I don't think anybody could name that many that they would take instead of T. Higgins. So he just wants really the biggest overall take from this is getting the value that he deserves, getting the money that he believes the Bengals should have for him based on all that he's done for them. I mentioned the 1,000-yard, a couple 1,000-yard seasons already. Also, to just touch on that as well, those 1,000-yard receiving seasons are great, but he is coming off of a pretty poor one with no Joe Burrow being injured and really just the offense up and down, losing a lot of pieces. He only had 42 receptions. He was injured as well. Only 5 touchdowns and 656 yards. All were career lows. But overall, I don't think you could just hold that on T. Higgins. It's not like everybody else was humming on offense. It was a down year for the whole Bengals team. They didn't make the playoffs, and now this year you want to look to try and get back in there again, which is why you have Zach Taylor and every other member of the Bengals organization saying that they expect T. Higgins to be here, they want him to be here, because I think in the back of their minds, like most people I think will start to realize, is that it is coming down to crunch time a little bit with these contracts. They're going to have to make a decision. They're lucky that they have the franchise tag there to try and figure out the exact numbers, but I think they are coming to a realization that they're going to have to make a decision, a tough decision, and waiting up until next season or halfway through the season to see how T. Higgins develops. Say he has another down year. Now with Joe Burrow coming back and Jamar playing great, if T. Higgins struggles, then that decision becomes a little bit easier, so it makes sense, but it becomes tricky if T. Higgins plays really well and he's having a career year, then the decision becomes extremely hard at that point. So weighing your options on waiting longer and not hoping, but just seeing if he plays bad or has a career year could weigh your options in either direction. So that's something the Cincinnati Bengals have to, decipher between. They drafted Jermaine Burton there to add a little bit of depth there, I assume, thinking beyond T. Higgins if he moves on. So that's an option that they have, but, it just makes this year coming up for the Cincinnati Bengals that much more important. They have Joe Burrow coming back, hoping to keep him healthy and upright with all the additions that they made, especially with Trent Brown on the offensive line. I'm sure they're going to go all out this year, all in, if you would. Another popular phrase used this offseason. The Bengals, they haven't said it, but they're looking like they're going to be all in. With these contract talks coming down to the wire, I expect them to really push hard to make a Super Bowl or make it a late run into the playoffs this season. So that's where they stand with T. Higgins. I don't expect anything to get done thus far, but you never know, really, with these contracts. There's a lot of teams that need wide receivers out there. Maybe they get a trade offer or something like that. But for now, T. Higgins is expected to be a Cincinnati Bengal in 2024. So with that, we will move on with the show and into the next segment. After the break, I'll get into more NFL draft talk around the new duos that I am really looking forward to seeing in 2024. A couple of rookie duos, some rookie mixed with some veteran duos that I think are going to be must-see TV next year in the NFL. So stick around and find out how I have them ranked, who made my list, and who just barely missed the cut. All coming up right after this break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.